Hello and welcome again to Expounding the Bible. I'm your host, Nathaniel Morrell. In this study, we have Pastor Derek here again with us. If you all remember, last time he was with us, we were talking about the history of Egypt, paralleling Egypt with America, and looking at the history with the famine and paralleling socialism and things of that nature, politically and economically. A very good study. I'll have it for you on the end screen if you would want to see that. Today we are going to talk about when nations die. Study that Pastor Derek came up a while back, and we're going to parallel we're going to look at history and some things of ancient Rome and some things of the United States, and looking at if we can find any parallels, what do the historians say, and see if the same way that the ancient civilizations fell, is that where we're going? Can we grab some lessons from history? Because history tends to repeat itself, and we do know that because of that, if we could learn from history, we could hopefully prevent what may happen in the future, because history tends to repeat itself. So with that, Pastor Derek, you want to lead us?
I remember when I think I was in the 5th grade, our teacher told us that history is cyclical. Now, I don't know how old you are in the 5th grade. What are you, 8 or 9, something like that? I don't know. Something to that effect. And I remember thinking, this guy's got to be crazy. But once I became an Adventist, once I began to study the Bible, once I began to learn history, I found out this interesting scripture in the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon makes this statement, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit.
See, I was opposite of you growing up. I always enjoyed history whenever I was in class.
Yeah. Well, history meant absolutely nothing to me until I became a Seventh-day Adventist. That was the most least important or interesting subject I had ever seen in my life. I didn't care for it. And I remember used to think to myself, so what does this have to do with me? And at that time, I thought nothing. But once I began to study the Bible, once I began to learn these great truths, then I found out what Solomon says here. This is Ecclesiastes, the 1st chapter. We'll read a couple of texts of Scripture. Ecclesiastes 1, 9, and 10. Solomon, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he said, "The things that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun." And then he asks the question, is there anything whereof it can be said, see, this is new? Question. It hath already been of old time, which was before us. Same book, chapter 3, verse 15, he also says, that which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been. And God requireth that which is past. So basically what Solomon is saying is what my teacher said, that history is cyclical. And I could see this from my scriptural position, and then I remembered what that teacher told me years ago when I was 8 or 9 years old and knew nothing about nothing. So I made this decision, this guy has got to be crazy. And I remember walking home thinking, there's no way this is true. But thank God I was only 8 or 9, so I got an excuse for that, because, yes, since then I have found out that history is cyclical.
It repeats itself.
If we can learn our lessons from history, which we never do, we would be able to avoid many issues that we are dealing with today. But again, it is cyclical. But I was interested in prophecy, but I knew nothing about history. So I started studying, especially the book of Daniel, the history of nations. And I learned about Babylon. I could read about Babylon, Medo-Persia in the Bible, the various issues that were involved with there. I could go to history. I could see the history of Babylon and the Medes and the Persians, and how one empire fell to another empire, And then I knew somewhat about Alexander the Great and the issues that were happening there. I did a lot of research on Greece. But the one that troubled me, I was especially troubled with Daniel, the 7th chapter. And it's this fourth beast that Daniel sees. We'll read it, Daniel 7. You want to read that, Nathan?
Sure.
7:7.
Daniel 7:7.
Yes.
And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and it stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse or different
Yes.
from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
So here we have, as Nathan had read, and I understood that the nation of Rome was the last. It's very interesting. You have expansion through repetition. As you read in the Bible, Babylon was a smaller and lasted the length amount of time, but it was a world-class superpower. Then Medo-Persia was longer. Then Greece was the largest of the empires, but it fell apart after Alexander the Great, and that's also in Daniel, the 8th chapter, but we won't go there. And then I was just fixated on this fourth beast, which I knew little to nothing about the history of Rome. Now, once I began to find out about how Daniel describes this is very interesting that Nathan read. The fourth beast, he says, look how Daniel, he doesn't describe this last beast in any other terminology. He uses specific terminology concerning the fourth beast that he does not use concerning the other three that came before it. He says, it's dreadful, he says, and it's terrible.
And strong exceedingly.
And not just strong, as you said, it's exceedingly strong. So this isn't just a powerful nation, this is an exceedingly powerful nation. As this Daniel is describing these things. And then he says it has great iron teeth, and it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse or different, as Nathan brought out, from all the beasts that were before it, and of course it had 10 horns. So I asked myself, how could this nation, pagan Rome, how could it be dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong, and how could it be such a powerful, wealthy, longest lasting of all the empires of antiquity? And I said to myself, how in the world can a superpower of this magnitude vanish and disappear and fall into pieces?
I think pagan Rome fell in 476 AD.
Yes.
Pagan Rome fell in 476. Before then, it ruled, I think it was established, they beat the Grecians in 168 BC.
Yes.
So from 168 to 476, that's almost, 600 years?
Yes.
So for 600 years, the Roman Empire dominated the whole entire world.
Yes.
I would say. So with their demise in 476, you wondering how did that demise fall? Or how did that demise happen?
What happened? That was the big question,
Now,
Nate.
for some of you who are watching, who may not know exactly what we're talking about, I just want to give a little background
That's
on
very
Daniel
good.
7.
Excellent.
We did a study on Daniel 7 maybe about a year ago or something. I'll have it on the end screen and also in the description below if you want to see that. We actually did a study with Daniel 2. I did a study on Daniel 2, Daniel 7. I may have touched on Daniel 8, but we also tied in Revelation 13 and 17 and looked at how the Roman Empire was rising and falling, and how it became the papacy through the papal Roman, the Holy See.
Correct.
And we actually want to give a little background here in Daniel chapter 7, because you may be saying, well, how do you know this fourth beast is Rome? Well, if you go to verse 23, God shows Daniel, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which will be diverse from all kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and break it in pieces. So this fourth beast, God's telling Daniel, is this fourth kingdom that will come up. Now, when you study Daniel 7, you're going to see four beasts that Daniel sees. The first is going to be a lion, which is representing Babylon. This is parallel to Daniel chapter 2 with the image.
Yes.
The head of gold, Babylon, the chest and arms of silver, which is Greece and Middle Persia, the belly and thighs of brass, which is Greece, and the legs of iron, which is Rome. One empire, one country represented by metals coming after another.
Yes.
And Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold, but after you, another empire will come represented by the chest and arms of silver, which is Middle Persia. Who conquered Middle Persia? The bronze body part, which is Greece. And who conquered Greece? The legs of iron, which is Rome. And here in Daniel 7, God is giving Daniel basically the same type of vision, putting in more detail but instead of a statue represented by different types of metals, it's going to be given as different types of beasts coming. So a lion, being Babylon. Then after the lion comes, here comes the bear, which is Middle Persia. After the bear comes a leopard with four heads, symbolizing Greece when it was divided into four after Alexander the Great's death. And after the leopard comes in this beast, dreadful and terrible, which who conquered Greece? It was the Roman Empire. So now we pick it up here, which we read of this beast that Daniel describes being great, strong exceedingly, and history can show that the Roman Empire was probably one of the largest empire that's ever existed in history, and very strong. And it also used iron as its weapons.
That's true.
For warfare. So it's interesting how it talks about iron here, and Rome was one of the ones that used iron very well. So so now we want to figure out, as Derek said, how did this great beast, how did Rome fall in history? How did Rome fall, and if there's any parallel between this country and Rome?
And that's what happened. As I had been praying, and I was really, for several months, I was really tormented by this text of Scripture as I was trying to understand it and researching. And it's very interesting. I listened to, this was before the internet days. I was listening to a program, and they were talking about the rise and fall, or the demise of the pagan Roman Empire. So I was really fixated on this program that I was listening to. It was on the radio.
This was probably before I was born.
Yeah, it probably was. This is early mid-90s.
Before I was born.
And a man came on there by the name of Jim Nelson Black. I hope I can show that without getting in trouble. And he is a historian. And he looks at history somewhat in a different way than many of the other historians, like Edward Gibbons, who is probably the leading most authority on the rise and the fall of the pagan Roman Empire. Gibbons was a French historian who lived at the time of the French Revolution. But Mr. Black here, he goes in and he breaks down a variety of different things, and he sees things from a slightly different perspective than Gibbons, even though Gibbons will document everything that we have in this book here. But there are things that he brings out, this guy brings out, that Gibbons did. Gibbons looks at it, and it's good that he does from a completely 100% secular perspective. He doesn't have a slant one way or the other. Now this guy, when he looks at it, he sees the spiritual aspect of what happened, and also something that he talks about is the political and social events
economic.
Economic, especially economic, He brings this out that Gibbons doesn't. Economic, spiritual, and the social events that happened at these times, and how he brings out how these things brought about the demise of the pagan Roman Empire. So when I listened to the show, I was hearing everything that I wanted to know. And I knew this book had the answers to, so I ran out and bought it. And I began to read it, and I was absolutely mesmerized by the material and the things that Mr. Black brings out in this book. And again, it's called When Nations Die. And the reason he does this is what he does a parallel. He breaks down the demise of the pagan Roman Empire, but what he also shows is everything that brought about the demise of the pagan Roman Empire is everything which I didn't even realize it at the time. I had no clue. But when I began to read it, he was showing how everything that brought about their demise, we have every aspect of that in the United States of America today.
Really?
So this is what I want to get into. We want to look at pagan Rome and America. And I'm telling you, you can take out all this history from pagan Rome, and if you put in America, it's everything that we got. So this is what we're going to look at today.
All right.
And he opens up with a very interesting statement, and I'm going to try to get my ducks in a row because there's so much material. And I had to pick out the high points. There's so much I would love to read.
We're going to try to have it for you on the screen, so as Derek is reading, you could probably follow up on the screen. But you may want to just say the page that you're in.
Yes, I will. Okay. This is page 6 from the book, excuse me, When Nations Die. Page 6, and we'll flip over to 9 and 10. This was a study done by the Heritage Foundation, and a man by the name of Bennett and also Jack Kemp were compiling this, and this is what Bennett says. He says, but according to the study, during the same 30 years of period, there was 500, this is talking about America. Now remember, this was in the 90s. They compiled these statistics in the 80s and the 90s. And we'll see if things have improved since then. But he said, according to Bennett's study, during the same 30-year period, a 560% increase in violent crimes and a 400% increase of illegitimate births, despite massive levels of public assistance, unprecedented welfare spending, we witnessed a quadrupling of the divorce rate, tripling of the number of children single-home parents, 200% increase in teenage suicides, and a drop of 75 points in the average SAT scores among the students. So we see here a decline. He is showing us there's a decline in society, in morals, and in the educational system. And now let's take a look at page. Go ahead, Nate.
I would say we can see a lot of that today, especially rising up in the past couple years with divorce rates go high. They said that during the pandemic, divorces skyrocketed even more.
Yes, they did.
And you just said an increase in crime. I believe every major city in the United States has been seeing an increase in crime in the last couple years.
It's unbridled.
Well beyond what we expected it to. And it's no longer, crime has not been, see, back then I would say crime was done during the night hours or when no one was looking.
Typically, yes.
Man, you look at the news and it's happening in broad daylight in front of people's faces. It's just, criminals are no longer afraid anymore. They're not, rule of law is not respected.
It isn't.
No one's being hardly punished severely.
Right. So, Mr. Black asks this question. This is on page 74, and we'll flip over to, let me see, 74. 74 and 5. Okay, 74 and 5. Then I got another page, 122. But this is what he asks. He says, what did fell the Roman Colossus? And that's what I wanted to know. That's what gripped me so desperately in the early 90s when I was trying to comprehend and trying to understand history. I wanted to know why pagan Rome fell. So he asks the question again, what did fell the Roman Colossus? He says, what brought the majesty of the Caesars to a halt? He says, in his study, The Civilization of Rome, Donald Dudley says, no single cause by itself would have been enough to bring the empire to its knees. And that's true. It wasn't one single cause that brought about the demise of the pagan Roman Empire.
So it had to be multiple causes.
Multiple causes, and we're going to look at that. He says, rather, it required a large number of bad habits required over a long period of time. What history reveals, and this is true, history bears witness to all of this, Dudley says, is a number of weaknesses in Roman society. Roman society, their effects may be variously estimated, but in combination, they must have been largely responsible for the collapse. Farther over, on page 75, he says this, honesty and nobility of character disappeared. Wow, what a statement there. I mean, what could we see and understand about honesty and nobility today?
Disappeared.
Then he says, sexual immorality became rampant.
Well, we can see that everywhere.
That is just disgusting, what is happening in America today.
I see young people and they're bragging about body counts and how many sexual encounters they've had. It's no longer respected on the sacredness of marriage or the sacredness of a relationship. They just jump from one partner, multiple partners at the same time.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Going on, he says, sexual immorality became rampant. We know about this. We're going to discuss this a little bit. And speaking out against excess or corruption was called treason. If you spoke out against the immorality, the corruption, the treason, all of that was, he says, to squelch all evidence of resistance to their policies. Those are the political policies.
So what it's saying is that if you spoke against something Caesar was doing,
yes,
that you had proof that Caesar was involved in a political corrupt scheme, that would be called treason.
That's right.
It's interesting with what's going on right now.
Then he says Roman emperors from Nero on used the army and their personal guard as a sort of, check this, thought police. Do we have thought control in America today? They were practicing thought control in pagan Rome in their day. The exact same thing that socialism and the PC crowd, the politically correct crowd is doing today.
So censoring was rampant.
Yes, basically. It was.
Telling you what to think, how to think, and what to believe, and calling everything else disinformation.
Correct. And what not to say.
And what not to say.
Let me see, farther down. Let me see. Personal guard of thought police to ferret out dissent and punish opponents. While this may be one of the best early examples of political correctness, he calls it here in the book, even in the 90s they call it political correctness, he says again, this is one of the best examples of political correctness being enforced by government as it is today. It was merely one example of the extent to which a government will go to enforce its will upon the people. The very same thing that happened in Rome is happening in America today. When you step up and you call out the political and social and moral corruption, and there's other things too that is happening today. It says thought control, political manipulation, and intellectual exploitation have always been crude but simplistic forms of tyranny. But they are very effective, and it's true. We can see today that in America, the very same thing that was successful in Rome is successful in America today. It says, witness what is happening in our schools, in our universities today. And he talks about the Liberal Teachers Union had to have a stranglehold on the educational system, and a lot of information that is happening there. I have one more quote, page 122. Let me find this. 122.
It's interesting that you read all that, because everything that you read, we can see that today. You can, I mean, if
in the purest sense of the word.
If you can't see it, then you must be blind or something.
Or you're a part of it.
It's been happening for a while now, and now it's more rampant.
Okay, page 122. Oh, interesting. This is really, I really enjoyed this. This is page 122 of When Nations Die. Mr. Black says this. He says, please hear again these words that ring out from history. This is what we've got to learn. These words that ring out from history, as Solomon said, as we read it, Solomon told us, that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is now. We need to learn our history now. To understand prophecy, you've got to understand history. Because if you can understand history, history will tell you where you're going. That's why God gave us history. So we could see and understand not just where we came from and where we are, but where this country is heading.
Paul says that what was written before was written for our admonition,
Right.
for our learning, for examples. What happened in ancient Israel is for not just God's people, but for anyone who wants to study the scriptures and learn.
Very true. Very true. All you've got to do, and that's all I had to do. Like I told you when I was a kid, I walked home from school and I thought, this guy is crazy. Now, everything he said, I'm understanding, and I see how significant it is. Going on. He says, a nation that loses, he uses French, raison d'etre. I had to look that word up. It means direction.
Direction.
Okay. I thought, what is that? So a nation that loses its direction cannot long survive. Pagan Rome lost her direction. A nation does not have to be overrun by foreign enemy to be utterly destroyed. Check that. He says, sometimes the most dreadful aliens are those who dine at your own table. A nation does not collapse only when it has been vanquished by barbarian hordes. He says, Rome, listen to this. Powerful statement. Powerful statement. He said, Rome wasted away long before the barbarians ever arrived, and it did. Rome wasted away long before the barbarians ever arrived. He said the great pity for the Goths who claimed Caesar's throne was that it was simply an empty chair. He says the glory had long since departed, and it had. What is he saying? What is he saying? Now that I see and understand the history of Rome and what happened to Rome, I can see, and I'll tell you now, and we'll investigate this. We'll bring out some points, some key points that brought about the demise of the Roman Empire, but it wasn't from outside sources.
It was from within.
It was from within. The truth of the matter is Rome rotted from within and simply imploded on itself. And then they just walked in and took it over. There was nothing left.
Well, it's easy to rot from within if you have the high officials of the nation involved in corruption.
Yep.
Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
If there's corruption going on, obviously eventually is going to come to light, but
Yes.
it's going to cause demise. I mean, you look at if a company is doing corrupt things, you know, the first thing to go is, you know, the CEO or
Yes.
someone's getting the company gets ruined. So you can put that on a bigger scale, and ancient Rome, that's exactly what happened.
Yes.
Now, in what type of detail? How did that go on?
Let's take a look at a variety of issues that were present then, that are present today.
That are present today
Right.
in this country.
Hard to imagine in America that, yes, we will find everything, and I'm just skipping over. I'm just hitting the high points. There is so much information in here. And so I'm just going to hit some high points, hopefully food for thought for you to investigate this, because I'm telling you, the Bible and history are telling us exactly where we're going. So let's take a look at this. This is on page 51. Let me think. All right, let's take a look at what's the page on 51. 50 and 51 it is, which is what I've got here. Okay, let's take a look at it. It says, on page 50, it says, and I got to skip over things. I can't read everything as much as I would like to. He says, and of course, taxation grew, this is in Rome, taxation grew so oppressive in the latter years of the Roman Empire that wealthy landowners actually fled into barbarian territories to avoid the long arm of Roman law, an act of defiance punishable by death. But the problem is Rome began to have to tax their people because their government had expanded so much from its origin, and when its peak in power and prestige in the 1st century AD, that's when Rome was at its peak of power and prestige in the world in the 1st century AD. Then after that, they began to tax, and part of the reason was, there were many reasons, but part of the reason was because of what he describes here, and it's not in my notes, but I'll talk to you about it. He calls it imperial overstretch. The sad reality about Rome is they got too big. And when they got too big, it cost them a lot of money, and we'll read at some of the reasons and issues why here. It cost them so much money to protect their borders. They were so spread out, and they had to have, you know, different places and different nations that were under their control, such as even Israel, Palestine.
Right.
Right.
Now you have, talking about Israel, Palestine, since you just mentioned one of the things that caused the collapse of Rome,
Yes.
was taxation.
Yes.
It sounded a bell on my mind.
Go ahead.
You remember when Solomon died?
Yes.
And I think you did a study on this a while back.
Yes, I did.
When Solomon died and his son Rehoboam took over.
Correct.
What did they tell Rehoboam?
Yeah.
They told Rehoboam, they said, hey, your father was killing us with taxes.
Yes.
Cut the taxes out, cut them in half, whatever, eliminate the burden from the people.
Yes.
And the people will serve the king gladly.
They'll love you.
They'll love you. But that's not what he did.
No. He talked to another group
He talked to some young guys
that he went to school with.
who were money hungry, and they said, hey, increase the taxes
Yes.
and get the people to submit to you by force.
Right.
Show them who's boss. And he's
Good
like,
point.
I'm going to increase your taxes. Guess
Yes.
what? I'm not going to lift up your burden. I'm going to increase your taxes, and you're going to submit to me. And what happened? It caused a split.
It caused a split.
It got the split. Israel
Great
or
example.
Judea split in half, and it became the kingdom of the north,
Northern and
with
the southern
Israel
kingdom.
and the southern kingdom of Judah on the
Right.
south. So taxation caused the
Yes.
demise of ancient Israel in terms of
It
a
sure
nation
did.
in unity.
It split Israel. That's an excellent point, because it was taxation that began the demise. Well, I would say the demise had already begun. It had actually already
begun.
begun.
What Solomon did, he actually did some of the things that you're going to bring out right now.
Yeah, he did. Solomon did. Yeah, real bad. But it's true. It's very interesting that taxation was the straw that we say broke the camel's back. And then there was a split between the northern and southern kingdom. So that's an excellent point. Man, there's so much. I see this and I see that. I think read this. It's so much. I just wish I could get into all of it. This needs to be known. Let's go over to page 51. He said, and another fact of many Americans today no longer seem to remember is that there was no such thing as income tax in this country until the second decade of this century. Did you know that? Our founding fathers, this is what I say, the more I learned about America, the more I saw the genius of our founding fathers. They were genius. They weren't perfect, but they were genius. And the reason what I learned about the founding fathers of our country, I say these two things about them. I learned this years ago. Not only did they know history,
they lived through it.
They lived history. So this is why they gave us the most near perfect form of government in the history of the world. And that's making a very long story short, and I'd love to expound on that, but I can't. But the most near perfect form of government in the world. Let's go on. It says again, in the beginning, our founding fathers said that it is unconstitutional, it is illegal to tax a person's income. Also, too, there was no property tax. You could not tax a person's property.
So as soon as you bought it, you owned it.
You literally owned your property. If I had 100 acres,
you owned it.
I own that 100 acres, and the government could not take it to me because the government can tax you. Guess what?
They own it.
They own your property. Property tax is nothing more than rent you pay to the government for the property that you supposedly own.
So don't pay your taxes and you'll see who really
Right. That's exactly what I say. Don't pay your property taxes. You'll find out real quick who owns your property. Moving on. He said again, no longer seem to remember that there was no such thing as income tax in this country until the second decade of this century, and that was because of the war. The first income tax was initially proposed as a voluntary system in 1909. Well, what was getting ready to happen?
World War I.
W1, that's correct. But soon enough, the voluntary levy became a permanent fixture. Wow.
That's very convenient.
How nice. We're getting into the coffers of the people now. He said World War I provided the provocation for government confiscation of the wealth, but World War II made it law.
Oh, so World War II, WW2 sealed it.
It sealed the deal. They had it. They fired it up, but it was kind of voluntary, and they kept it. But World War II made it law. And who did it? Roosevelt.
President Roosevelt was president during WW2.
Yes, FDR. Franklin D. Roosevelt came onto the scene with a New Deal. Oh, it's a New Deal. But that doesn't mean it's always a great deal. It just means it's new.
New Deal.
Right. He says with a New Deal and virtually grab bag of social program and a grab bag of social programs designed to take wealth away from individuals and give it to the government. So FDR, go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say that was what I would say probably the first attack on the middle class.
Oh, absolutely. In the purest sense of the word, that is very true. I'm going to read this. It's not my notes, but I got to read this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a personal attack. Do you know how They peddled it. Do you know the propaganda that the Socialist Party used in the 1930s, 1920s, and 1930s to get this passed? Because I read this in school. Soak the rich. We're going to get the rich people.
Well, that's exactly what we see today.
It's the same lie.
They're like, hey, let's
It's
tax
the same lie.
People say let's
The
tax
1%.
the rich. Yeah, let's tax the rich 99% of the income.
Right.
And they were saying, this one guy was saying, even if you tax the rich 100% of their income,
Right.
which is outrageous,
Yeah.
it will still not be enough to pay for Medicare.
It wouldn't. And that's statistically true. That's how the Socialist Party in the 1920s and 30s pushed it, and that's how they got the people to go for it, because they said, we're going to soak the rich. It was called. Go and look at it. It's in history. That's the propaganda they line. But when it finally went through, it was not the rich people, it was the middle class that got busted. They began to break the middle, slowly but surely. FDR was the first president in the history of America that stood up and said, vote for me and I'll send you a check. And that's exactly what he did. And that was when, now there can be arguments made before that. And I wouldn't argue their points. But I can officially say that's when socialism was born. I can at least say that. That is the time that socialism was born. It says here, underneath this, I don't have this in my notes, but I want to read it. There's so much. I see page, note after note, page after page, and I think, what am I going to do? Listen to this. This is also on page 51. He says, at the founding of this nation, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall said, the power to tax involves the power to destroy. That's what a Supreme Court Justice said when our nation was, when we were setting up our government and the Supreme Court. He said, like Franklin, Jefferson, Madison, and others, Marshall believed that the people had to be vigilant and perpetually on guard against the temptation of government to raid the public treasury. And that's exactly what they've done. That's exactly what they've done. But during the mid-19th century, state socialism, and that's what it is, state socialism began in earnest in Great Britain, and federal-minded Americans watched their experiment with great interest. So they watched the Brits as the Brits started to do it, and there's a whole history of it here, which I want to read, but I can't. There's so much. I just can't get into it.
You can get the book, or you can look up the book online if you want to read more.
Right. When Nations Die. It really should be a must-read for everybody, because you'll understand everything that's happening in America today. Okay, so taxation, overtaxation. How about the issue of welfare? Let me see, 54, 5, and 6. Let me see, 54. Okay, I read all of that on that part. How about the issue of welfare? Because welfare sounds great. Welfare.
I get money.
What a nice thing. It's welfare. What is welfare? 54. Let me see, on welfare. Okay, page 27. Page 27. Okay. What is welfare? Welfare is socialism. It's socialism.
How's that?
Because one of the principles of socialism, excellent question, I'm glad you asked. I'd have to talk about it, but let's talk about it. Socialism is making a class of people. This is one of the principles. There's many, many principles, and there's many, many types of different socialism, but one of the foundational principles of socialism is making a class of people, or a group of people, dependent on the federal government for everything. We will provide you everything. That's what socialism is welfare.
And you can look at countries that have implemented socialism.
Yes.
Countries like Venezuela. Venezuela implemented socialism with what was that president? Hugo Chavez.
Chavez.
Hugo
Correct.
Chavez?
That's right.
And Hugo Chavez said, well, the government is now going to take over this entity, is going to take over that entity, this business, that business. There was no more privately owned.
Enterprise, correct.
There was no longer any privately owned companies.
Correct.
Everything belonged to the government, and the government was going to share the wealth, as it were, to the people, and give the people a percentage of it. But look at Venezuela now, total collapse
Yes.
of the economy. Probably the highest, or the second highest, most highest inflation ever. I believe, I think
It's
Zimbabwe.
outrageous. Yeah.
I think Zimbabwe comes number one, I think, or whatever country
Yes.
in Africa. But Venezuela has outrageous inflation, government total collapse, corruption going on, which we just mentioned,
Absolutely.
everywhere. And Venezuela, I should say, is also very, very sexual immoral, as we just read. So
Yes.
we get all that we just read combined, and Venezuela is now in collapse, and we see these things happening in this country.
The people depend on the government. He says this. This is on page 27. He says, welfare politics is this country, welfare politics in this country has already created a vast constituency of dependency.
Dependent on government.
Yes, you depend on government.
You know, one of the now that you mentioned that, you know, they said that there's a documentary that aired, I believe, on the History Channel a while ago, and I have it in my iPad, or I used to have it. I can't remember the name of it, but it's about the French Revolution.
Yes.
And they said one of the things that why the French Revolution happened was because in France, there was really no middle class when you study history. The middle class was wiped out.
Yes.
Largely, and I believe maybe Great Controversy might mention this.
Yeah, it
the
does.
Huguenots and the Protestants made up a large portion of the middle class, and because they were Protestant, and the Catholics persecuted the Protestants,
Yes.
fled, or they got massacred, and they fled the country.
Correct.
So you had slowly but surely rich and poor.
Yes.
And the rich were getting richer, and you know, the poor, they were operating off of welfare, and
Yes.
and the king had to constantly give welfare to the poor and,
Yes.
and unfortunate. And I'm not saying, and I'm not trying to downgrade poor people. You know, if
No,
you come
that's not
across
the
misfortune, but the
How did they
abuse,
get that way?
The abuse of it
We're
was
talking-
so
yeah.
great. And on top of that, France, the king was overspending.
Of course.
Beyond that,
Yeah.
and all that played a role in what eventually became the demise of France.
And it will be the demise of America too. Going on, he said constituency of dependency. That's what socialism does. It makes you dependent on the government. But if you depend on the government, guess who owns you?
Government.
The government owns you. You don't want to be owned by the government.
So it's like you're not going to bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah, you better not. Going on. He says that is empowered by at least 3 generations of welfare recipients. What is empowered by at least 3? That is what created a constituency of dependency. He said then, today we're in our 4th generation of people who are completely 100% totally dependent on the government. We are in now our 4th generation of people who have never worked a day in their life, and they have a home provided. I've known some. I've known some people. When they were born, they came into a government home. The government provided food. The government paid for the electricity. Government paid for the. I knew back in the 90s a lady, and you know, her and her family. This is before free health care come along. They all got free health care. but they were in a government home. They got government food. The government provided everything for them.
So basically, why should I have to work?
Right.
You should be able to provide for me because you're very rich. You can
Yes.
afford it. So let's basically punish you for working hard
Right.
and getting wealth, and give me some by just because I don't want to work.
Right. They don't have to work.
And notice the ones that are pushing this stuff, this socialism things, are young people.
Of course they
And
are.
young people don't want to work.
Yeah. They don't want to work. In 2 more years, in 25, I will have been working for 50 years. Now, technically, it goes beyond that. But I got my first job when I was 16 years old, although I had been doing other things. And that was in 1975. I'll be working for 50 years. But this generation does not want to work. Going on. That is empowered by at least 3 generations of welfare. Today it's 4. The promise, he says, of cradle to grave support is what socialism is. Has removed the desire, and we see that it's true, and the prospect of self-reliance or family integrity. Individual initiative is no longer considered to be the way to achieve prosperity. Now that's the way I was raised. I was raised that you got to get out and you have to go after it and you got to make it. That's one thing I love about capitalism. You actually set your own standards. You actually set your own bar.
Entrepreneurship or what?
Correct. You can set your own bar and you can go as hard and fast and as high as you. Socialism sets the bar for you and you will not go beyond this.
It creates a sense of entitlement, basically.
Absolutely.
Especially amongst young people. I'm entitled to what you have, even
Yes.
though I didn't work anything for it.
Right. That's why he says again exactly what you said. Individual initiative is no longer considered to be the way to achieve prosperity. Rather, government largesse, I can think that's the word largesse. Sorry. Rather, government largesse is considered to be the source of wealth because I don't have to work. I have a menial home. I got my food. I did a study with Nath and his brothers. When Israel was in Egypt, they were in bondage, but it's not bondage like you think. They have discovered how things work. The Jewish people were the ones who were working to construct the cities, but they actually lived outside of the cities, and they worked in the cities, but they had their own homes. But what the problem was, the government was the one who provided their food. They took care of everything. They took care. And you see, they were actually in bondage in socialism.
So when they came out of Egypt, that's why they didn't want.
Yes.
And they rebelled many times because now they had to do things for
Yes.
themselves, by themselves, to fend for themselves.
You see, they didn't get their weekly or monthly rations as well as they did in Egypt. They made the Egyptians, the government made sure that they hit their rations every week or probably every month, and everything was restocked, and they never had to worry about food or the cost of food. All they had to do was go in and work on the government projects, their super cities and everything else that they were building, the pyramids and so forth. That's what they did. But they always supplied, and when they got freed, they got out there and went,
Now we gotta do things.
Where's our monthly ration? God didn't drop down you see, now they were used to and they were dependent on the system of the government, which was socialism. Moving on, he says, by looting the treasury, by constantly increasing the burden on the declining number of taxpayers, that's a whole conversation. Increasing the burden of the declining numbers of taxpayers, and by entering into disastrous levels of debt through deficit spending, politicians have bought off the votes of the underclass, because it's the underclass that depends on them and they keep voting them back in.
So it's a cycle that repeats itself.
It is a cycle. It's something the Socialist Party figured out a long, long time ago, how to stay in power. We'll do it by keeping this class dependent on us. And one of the things I learned, people are like water. What does water do?
Takes the path of least resistance.
Takes the path of least resistance. If I have to work to earn a living over here, I don't know. Well, the government says, well, they'll give me this and this and this. People by nature will take the path of least resistance. That's why socialism, they call it progressive. That's another fake term for socialism today. I hear the Socialist Party saying, we're the progressive party. Well, that's because socialism is progressive. They're playing a word game on you. Let's read on. By entering into disastrous levels of debt through deficit spending, politicians have bought off the votes of the underclass. And that's what they did. They bought them by giving them a handout. And when they give them a handout, they vote for them. And it's just menial material. It's menial things. They'll give you crumbs, but they keep voting them back in because they want their crumbs.
And you can see that in the inner cities today.
Terrible. Terrible.
You know, you got like Section 8 housing and projects
Yes.
and all that, and people wondering, well, when are we going to have success is not the word I'm looking for. When are we going to have a better life, I guess?
Life.
And they've been the same way for the past 40, 50, 60 years.
At
But
least.
if you look at the history of politics in those cities, it's been the same. They keep voting the same people
yes.
with the same policies in there, so
Yes.
it basically brings no change.
And the same thing that's happening in the cities, Rome was practicing socialism. They had figured out how to do this. And let's read on what this says. It says, this nation desperately needs a complete refocusing of its views and values, a complete turnaround in its morals and behaviors. If the nation is to be spared imminent disaster, the welfare addiction, and that's what it is, it's addiction because I can get money for nothing. Welfare addiction of government must be abandoned, and failed policies of the 60s must be discarded. It was when Johnson came in with the concept of the Great Society. He called it the Great Society. That's as big a lie as FDR, who was also a socialist. Johnson was a socialist. And FDR said, we're going to soak the rich. We're going to go after their money. And the middle class said, yes, we're going to go get them. And truth is, biblically, we don't have any right to their money.
No.
We do not have a right to, if a person earns their money honestly and legitimately, we don't have any right to it. But socialism lies to the poor, tells them we're going to give it, and then what they do is they go in and attack the middle class.
And after that deal, after that Great Society, we saw families being broken up.
Yes.
And the poor increased, actually. Poverty. Didn't he also declare war on poverty? Was that Johnson?
Oh yeah.
He did. He declared war on poverty, and poverty actually increased.
It increased
after that.
Everything they said was a lie. Imagine that.
You look at the nuclear family back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, especially the African American families, and they were very tight. They were united.
They were.
Fathers were always in the
were.
home. Children were respectful. And today, it's sadly, majority of the cases not like that.
Right. It's completely flipped. I want to pull something up here.
Sure.
Let me see if I have the right. Okay, here we go. I'll try to hold on to this. Listen to what Mr. Black says. These are government statistics from that time. Okay, 24 and 5. We're going to talk about the the subject rather of out-of-wedlock pregnancy or degeneracy in America, which this is. I'm going to call it degeneracy, even though I know that's not PC, and I also know I really don't care. It's the truth.
Families today are no longer united as they were back.
Correct.
Back 40, 50 years ago.
Right. It says this. So what is the root of America's crime problem? This is the root of it right here. It says, what is the root of the sickness that is killing thousands of innocent citizens every year? He says this. Are these visible symptoms? He says in 1993, listen to this. In 1993, 375,000 babies born in U.S. hospitals. He says nearly 10% of all live births and even a greater number of stillborn were exposed to, listen to this, illegal drugs in the womb. So he says 375,000 children that were born in 1993 were exposed to illegal drugs when they were inside their mothers. He said this. Add to this fact that, watch this, he says 22% of all white births, all children that were born to white parents. Then he says, this is in 1993. We're going to see what it is today. I had to look this material because this is old news. In the mid-90s, 22% of all white births, and then it says 65% of all black births were to unwed mothers, and it's true, this is all true, you have a portrait of a serious and pernicious social pathology in the land. That's all true. One out of every 3 children born in America today is illegitimate, and current research shows, and this is true, that a frightening percentage of these children will become the psychopaths, criminals, and violent offenders in the future, and they have.
So you take the father out the home. You introduce drugs to society.
Yes.
The fathers get hooked on drugs, they get incarcerated. Mothers now raise children by themselves.
Yes.
And the children don't have a father figure, so they grow up to be
violent
and drug addicts. And I'm not saying most of them, but I'm not saying
all of them. A large percentage.
But most of them do. You can see statistics. Most of them, basically the fathers are very important in the home.
Yes.
And what society has done is made the father figure basically like the enemy of the state.
Right. Absolutely. And the father is insignificant. Today, what are the current statistics today?
And I've seen videos, just to say this real quick, I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube where women proudly say, we don't need no man. We don't need men.
I know
we don't need men.
I've seen them, yeah.
So this attitude of not wanting to have a man in the relationship, especially to be a father figure for children, it's actually grown and it's backfiring on society. Now you said 22% of white babies were born out of wedlock and 65% of African American babies were born out of wedlock. And that was back in 1993. And I believe the statistics that you're grabbing, that was from 2016 or
2016, yeah.
2016. So 22% for Caucasians, 65% for African Americans on babies born out
in
of wedlock.
90s.
In the 90s. What's that now?
Okay. It's very interesting. It has this broke down this way. It says in 1990 it was among the whites it was 15%.
15%?
In 2016, it was 28%. In 2016, it was 28%. In 1990, among the blacks, it was 63%. In 2016, it had risen to 70%. And today, I checked the current statistics, out of wedlock births among the blacks is now at 80%.
So amongst every ethnicity, but more African Americans,
yes,
big time. But basically, if you look at the statistics, every ethnicity, the percentage of out of wedlock births have increased tremendously.
Yes, and consider this, and this is the truth. I've learned this. Everything that's happening in this country is by design. This is not just by chance it has worked out this way. This is all by design.
So what is the parallel with Rome?
Let me see. Of course, abortions in Rome, 24:5. What did? Let me see. Abortion. Oh, okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. Let's go to. I knew some of these overlap. 24:5. I read that. Okay. Let's go to page 186 and 9. Page 186 and 9. In Rome. Okay, let's take a look at this. Out of the book, Keys of This Blood, they found this. It says, as in the late period of the Roman Empire, listen to this, adultery, promiscuity are common. Wow, any chance that's happening here?
Fornication, adultery, cheating on spouses.
Right. It's just rampant. He says, watch this. This was happening in Rome. But, go ahead.
You know one thing before you keep on going. You said promiscuousness.
Yes.
Reigned high.
Correct.
You know. Today I see there's many videos of women proudly saying that it's great to be promiscuous, it's great to have multiple partners and to be with multiple men, even at the same time. Women are proud of it. You know what? Because back in America, back in the 1800s, it wasn't that way. Women, they weren't promiscuous. It was considered shameful.
Correct.
To be promiscuous. Women were honorable. They were sacred. They held to their purity and respectable more. You know what made promiscuity rapid in America? Feminism. The feminist movement.
I was going to say the women's suffrage movement.
The feminist movement said, well, we should be able to do anything what we want as our body, whatever. And a lot of women bought it. And feminism was one of the key things that made women against men and alienated men from society. And now we see, what's the price? A mother struggling with multiple kids, multiple dads.
It's terrible.
And now they have to ask for the government
for assistance.
Because they got no husband to care for them.
That's right.
And
this is by design.
The children then get raised all out of whack.
Crazy.
So there's
no discipline in the house. Today is not uncommon for a woman to have 4 to 5 children, every one of them sired by a different man. None of the men are involved in any support or any influence, positive influence at all in the home. And to top that off, that isn't the only women that these men are running around here with.
The men are
with multiple women.
The men used to hold on to one woman. Now we see men going
multiple
from women to women.
And they have many children by many different women, and those women are having children by many different men, and you have an absolute
confusion
formula for disaster, and it will implode.
So we see some of these things today happened in Rome.
Yes. Here it is. It says, in the latter period of the Roman Empire, adultery, promiscuity are common. Young men and women of the elite class in Rome, it said, refused to marry or to be tied down by the demands of hearth and home. Childbirth was avoided by every means. I found out they were doing abortions in Rome.
Killing babies.
Yeah. I had no idea they did this. It says, childbirth was avoided by every means, and young men who should have aspired to public office or other important positions turned instead to drunkenness, gluttony, gambling, blood sports, and unbridled sensuality. Well, I hope that doesn't happen here in America. Edward Gibbons, who was the leading authority on the history of the Roman Empire. Edward Gibbons is the man. It says he observed that the leaders of the empire gave into vice of strangers, moral collapse, laws became oppressive, and the abuse of power made the nation vulnerable to barbarian hordes. How about that southern border?
You know what? Actually, people who voted for the southern border to be open are now complaining that we need to close and do something about it because
Yeah.
the crime in their place has
Yeah.
gone way high.
Yeah.
And they've
Imagine that.
they've actually caught terrorists from the Middle East
Yeah.
coming through the southern
Of
border.
course they are. They can walk right over.
To commit
Right.
crime.
We've also
The drug cartels are making millions every single day.
Yeah.
with the-
Look at the. If you want to
drugs
see where
pouring into the
America is
country.
going, look at California. They're already there. We spent trillions of dollars in military equipment at the taxpayers' expense to protect Ukraine's borders,
But we don't protect ours.
but we haven't spent one dime to protect ours. We'll protect Ukraine, but we're not going to we leave ours open. Going on. He said Edward Gibbons observed that the leaders of the empire I read of this, gave into vice, the vices of strangers, moral collapse, laws became oppressive, and the abuse of power made the nation vulnerable.
That's actually how also ancient Babylon fell.
It did.
If you read ancient Babylon King Belshazzar,
Belshazzar,
throwing
yes.
a party for everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody getting drunk, everybody doing whatever they want to do.
And
the
that's
women
just
were
the
there
lighter
and all
side
that.
of what happened.
And here comes the Persians and the Medes, and they come and attack the city while everybody's partying and drunken. And Babylon was known for its debauchery anyway.
Terrible.
They just figure out they party it up. So we can see that happening a lot.
Here in America going on, he says the abuse of power made the nation vulnerable to the barbarian hordes. The abuse of power, it did. The abuse of power in America today makes America subject or vulnerable to our enemies. But he says this, but how are we any different today? He asked the question. Isn't contemporary culture in much the same state of dissipation and moral weakness? And the answer is yes. He says, in her study of the politics of immorality in ancient Rome, British historian Catherine Edwards says that contraception, abortion, that's what really, when I read that I was like, what? Abortion and exposure were common ways to prevent childbirth in Rome. I had to find out what exposure was. That's terrible.
It's out of this world.
It means exactly what it says.
Yeah.
I thought surely not.
Or Mardi Gras. You can go down to Mardi Gras down in New Orleans.
Exposure.
They don't care.
Yeah, that was exposure to babies. Common ways to prevent childbirth. Husbands refused to recognize any child they did not believe to be their own, happening today, until accepted by its father. A Roman baby did not, legally speaking, exist. Today, abortionists and their supporters have declared that the fetus, that a baby inside of a mother, of a human being, is not a human being until it is born. They think exactly the same way the pagan Romans think, and it is an atrocity.
You know what's interesting
Go
is
ahead.
if we find a molecule or some sort of bacteria in Mars, scientists say we found life on Mars. But you could call a bacteria on Mars life on Mars, but when you find live bacteria in a woman's uterus, you can't call that life on a uterus.
Right. And it has become a very sad day. It is a pathetically sad day when the most dangerous place that a baby could be is inside of its mother. That is a sad, sad day.
Okay.
190 and 191. Political corruption. 190 and 191. While Rome burned. You've heard that Rome burnt. That was under Nero, of course.
Nero burned the city of Rome down, blamed it on the Christians.
Yes, he did.
And started persecuting the Christians, I
Yes.
think. Yep.
But why did Rome really burn? It really wasn't the Christians. Rome burned at 25% taxation.
Oh, you're talking
There
about
was
that
a
part.
revolt at 25% taxation. We are over 50% today. Let's read this. There is in history perhaps no better example of the degree to which a nation can suffer in the hands of its immoral leaders than that of Rome under Nero, who ruled in the late 1st century during the Dark Ages. There were many periods of corruption. In Rome, there were many periods of corruption and scandal, and the ruling classes were soaked in sin and moral extravagance. After he had plotted and conspired to kill most of its adversaries, Nero decided that he wanted to be remembered as a great artist, musician, poet, and so on and so on. So he was the one, through taxation, and we see again, as it was talking about, the leaders of the nation were morally corrupt, and they saw the nation as nothing more than anything we can get out of the nation. Going on, it says over here on page 191. 191. It says this. But the historian Suetonius writes that the most damaging aspect of the emperor's reign, that's Nero, was his passion for building magnificent palaces and monuments. It was nothing, it says, in nothing was he so prodigal as in his buildings, says Suetonius. The estate he built for himself, which was called the woods, vineyards, or the cornfields, called the Golden House, was so enormous that it contained pastures, woods, vineyards, and cornfields, and an enormous lake. He had flocks of animals and even wild beasts roaming within the large walls. After the great fire in Rome, which we were reading about earlier, which was mostly blamed on the emperor himself, Nero launched a terrifying persecution of the Christians, claiming that they had set the fire that burned half the city. Then, as the ultimate demonstration of corruption, he had many of the believers dipped in pitch, crucified on crosses, set to blaze, and so forth. So it was, again, the political leaders who were steeped in corruption. They were the ones who increased the taxes on the people.
Passing spending bills.
Yes.
Trillions of dollars of spending bills unnecessarily.
Building unnecessary buildings. Their government had grown exponentially. They had created all these different offices, and government just grew out of control. The nation had grown out of control. They had to tax the people more and more, and the more they did, the more corrupt they became. Considering even this fact today, bringing this down today, that right now we are under the most corrupt and incompetent administration in the history of the United States. Bar none, this administration, the most corrupt, the most incompetent, and brethren, I'm telling you, that is saying a lot. Because on both sides, on the Republicans and on the Democrats, there has been gross immorality, gross corruption, gross abuse of power on both sides, and everything. I could read on and on about this.
Interesting. You mentioned the more Nero built large buildings, the more taxes and the more corruption became. And we spoke about Solomon earlier. And you know why Solomon instituted all those taxes that his son said he would increase the taxes?
Yeah.
You know why Solomon put all those taxes in the first place?
Yeah.
It was to house all his women, because Solomon had like 700 wives from different nations, all pagan heathen wives. So to accommodate them, he built large temples for them, palaces for them. Someone had to pay for all that. Well, the king wasn't going to take money from his own self.
No.
He was going to take it from the people.
Right.
And the people had to pay for it through the taxes, which became burdensome. Yes. And because his wives were heathen, and heathen worship were highly sexual,
Oh, yes.
Sexual orgies and things
Yeah,
happened
all
in
those
Jerusalem,
things.
happened
Correct.
in Israel,
Happened in Rome.
Society began. So you can see a lot
Happened
of
in
things.
America.
You can see a lot of things from Rome, from Solomon's time in Israel, causing Israel's demise,
Yes.
and our demise as a country today. We're no longer respected.
No.
Families are breaking apart. The family unit is no
Yes.
longer respected. And how about inflation and currencies?
Oh, wow.
I
Forgot about that.
You can probably bring something really quick.
Okay,
for that
let me
one,
see if I can.
I remembered you had the quarter
I
there.
forgot
and
about.
I was like,
Okay,
oh,
let me show the devaluation of currency. Let's hit this.
Because we spoke about that in our last subject when we were talking about Egypt and
Yes.
how the money failed in Egypt
Yes.
with the famine, and talking about
Okay.
socialism. How about Rome? And
The
America?
same thing happened in Rome. As Rome began to degenerate and inflation began to grow. Oh, please. Don't tell me you're going to do this.
Is it gonna freeze?
It's locked up. Yep, it's locked up. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, let me see if I can get to that. Okay, here we go. I found this. I wanted to use this as an example. I found this in my truck. If you can see that, that's a quarter. Nath, explain the problem with that quarter.
Well, the quarter, as you can see, maybe I can get a little closer to you. Maybe if you can see that. I thought at first that it was a dirty quarter, just a quarter laying around, just dirtied up.
That's what I thought too.
But as we were talking, this is actually a quarter that hasn't been plated yet.
It hasn't been plated. It never got plated.
Which is weird. I've never seen anything like this before.
I have neither. When Rome was at its power and peak of prestige in the world, their currency was pure gold and pure silver. Egypt, same, pure gold and pure silver. America, the same. Our currency was pure gold, pure silver.
The dollar was backed by gold.
The dollar was backed by
We were under
gold.
the gold standard.
We were under the gold standard.
Banks dealt with gold.
Right. You could own gold. And I could get into that, but we don't have enough time. Rome began to devalue their currency. When their currency started, it was 90+% silver. I can't show you this, but you can pull this up on the internet.
I'll try to put that on.
That'd
the
be
screen.
good.
Maybe you guys can see.
That'd be great.
I'll try to do that.
90% silver, and their gold was nearly 100% gold.
I'll provide you the link for that. If it's not on the screen, it should be in the description below.
As Rome declined, they began to devalue their currency. When Rome, the Western Empire, collapsed, their currency was base metals such as tin and various other things. A $0.25, which is what you see here, $0.25, used to be a $0.25 worth of silver back in late in the 19th century, early into the 20th century, as a $0.25 worth of 90+% pure silver. Today, our coinage is it's silver-plated copper. Dimes are not. Dime used to be 10 cents worth of silver. Quarter was even a $0.50 was a $0.50 worth of silver. Today, they are copper, silver plated. And like I said, this one just didn't get plated.
And pennies are zinc.
Pennies now are zinc.
And I think dimes too. Dimes have a small percentage of zinc. I
Oh
think.
yeah, they're not pure copper anymore.
Yeah, they're not pure. That's
No,
why you can
this
see
is
the
not
middle.
pure copper.
That's why you can see the middle of a coin. It's half copper.
Yeah,
And,
you look at the edge of your coin, you'll see a copper rim around there. That's because that's where the parting line was. When they plated it, that's where it held it, as it went through the tank to get plating. I know a little bit about plating, and that part of the coin didn't get plated, and it's copper.
So Rome went from gold to tin or base metals.
Correct.
As its currency. What about us?
Today, again, our currency, this thing here, is a piece of paper. some say material, whatever you want to call it, this is worthless. We are just running off of faith. This has absolutely no value whatsoever. But some people have gold and silver, real gold and real silver. Well, I got news for you. The dollar was pegged, we're going to have to end on this now. The dollar was pegged before FDR took us off the gold standard at $20 an ounce. So a $20 bill would buy as much as a $20 piece of gold. Today, an ounce of gold is right at $2,000, and a $20 bill won't hardly buy you I was going to say a burger at Mickey D's, but I don't want to I don't endorse that. $20 bill will hardly buy you a meal. But what was once $20 is now worth $2,000. So
I will say this quick. I remember 15 years ago, my mom would go to Walmart and fill up the cart of groceries and just pay $100 for a whole cart of groceries. About 6 months ago, I went over, I was in California, and again, California is expensive.
That's another
but you can even come over here in South Carolina and other parts of the country. You will not be able to fill up your shopping cart and pay $100.
No.
When I was in California, I didn't even fill up a tenth of my cart, and I already paid $100 for.
Oh, I believe it.
And I just looked at it and I said, I remember with $100, this shopping cart was full, and now with $100, I can't even get it a tenth way through.
No,
can't even get anything. Everything has been gone up. Inflation, unnecessary spending, which is what Rome
happened
did,
in Rome.
Which is what we're having now.
Same thing.
Which is what Solomon did to ruin Israel.
What our government has done to destroy our nation.
Spending spree, printing money, causing it to be devalued.
Devalue currency.
To spend more, causing inflation. We see that, and taxes, because it's inflation. Taxes has been going around.
Going up.
And crime increasing because of drugs, because of the family being ruined.
Everything that brought about the demise of the pagan Roman Empire is bringing about the demise. Their government became corrupt. We have an absolutely terrible government. The people that are running it, corruption is rampant.
And the Bible warns us about this. The Bible, as we said before, that which has been, will be, and
that
Paul
which is,
says.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull this up. I believe it's I believe I want to go to Romans chapter 15. I think it's Romans 15, if I'm not mistaken. Romans chapter 15. Yeah, this is one of them. Romans 15 verse 4 says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime."
Yes.
This is history. What we studied right here. In the Bible, we have the history of Solomon.
Correct.
We have the history of other nations,
right,
and their rise and fall.
Correct.
Whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for whose learning?
Our learning.
Were written for our learning, that through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, which includes prophecy and includes history,
yes,
we might have hope.
We can have hope.
So there is great lessons to be learned from history, and the Bible, of course, as we read the Bible, has a lot of history,
yes,
and lessons we can learn, not just history of people, but history of nations. And the Bible says that Rome is going to rise, and Rome fell. Now, in certain ways, Rome went back on its feet under a different guise, but as the pagan ancient Roman Empire, as we know it, the Western Empire fell in 476 to the barbaric tribes, collapsed, because eventually all this corruption and spending and
it imploded on itself.
Economy crashed, and it caught up to them.
Yes.
And we went through some of this. Now, we didn't go through everything as we wanted to, and you can see we've already spent an hour and a half at this, and we only covered just a scratch of surface area.
Really?
But show the book one more time, just so that they could see.
Must read. You want to know what's going on? If you want to know how it's going to happen and end, right here and right here. This has all the information. Well, it can't be a coincidence.
I hope you were blessed by the study. Thank you, Derek, for coming up and showing us some points throughout history and the Scriptures. And hopefully we could learn from history so we won't fall into the same type of destruction
Correct.
that these other nations fell into.
We need to know where God wants us to be when
Amen.
all this, and it's going to happen. And we could do another chapter on the result of this. And we might do that. What did pagan Rome do when they fell?
Interesting.
Very interesting.
So thank you for watching this video. I hope you were blessed by it. If you like this video, please press like. Also, don't forget to subscribe. We're also on Facebook at Expounding the Bible. Until then, this is your host, Nathaniel Merle, and our guest speaker, Derek here. We wish you all have a blessed day.